She left. I thought it was the end. I thought that nothing would change, that I would be left alone in this old house, remembering how she laughed, how she made me coffee, how her hair smelled after a shower. She betrayed me. I forgave her. And then she betrayed me again. And I didn't just forgive her. I let her stay. I hoped that together we could somehow fix everything. I was a fool, right? But when you're 60 and have 40 years of marriage behind you, it's hard to just ruin everything. We are not boys and girls to slam the door like that. I wanted to believe that it was just a mistake, that she was confused, that man was just her weakness. But she kept lying. And when she finally left, when she took her things and said she didn't love me anymore, you know what I felt. I was relieved. Yes, it hurt. It was scary. But relief is what overwhelmed me the most. I don't need to doubt anymore. I don't need to look for excuses. She chose her life. I was left with what was. But then she came back, and her return killed me. You are probably thinking, what does this mean? Why does he say it as if it were something terrible? After all, if a person comes back, it means that they have realized their mistake, right? They want to fix what they have destroyed. But no. I thought I had gone through the worst. I thought nothing could touch me anymore. I thought I had seen her at her worst. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. So listen carefully. And do not be distracted. This story is about money, about fear, about terrible injustice, and about how the people you've trusted your whole life can turn out to be your biggest enemies. And I am not the first and not the last person to experience this. It happens every day. But do you know what the worst part is? That you are never prepared for such a blow. I forgave her for everything. But her return was what finally killed me, and I'll tell you how it all happened. How I found myself homeless. How I had to start from scratch when I was already well over 60. How I realized that sometimes forgiveness is the worst thing you can do for yourself. This is not just a story about betrayal. This is a story about what happens afterwards. When you think it's over, but in reality, the worst is yet to come. So buckle up, it's going to be tough. I always thought I had a good life. Not luxurious, not perfect, but stable and calm. My age was already showing, but I felt fine. I had a house, a wife, memories of my youth, of my children who had grown up and gone away. I lived with Annie for over 40 years. 40 years of marriage is not a joke. It's not just a relationship, it's a lifetime. We built this house together, saved money for the future together, and went through difficulties together. And I never suspected that something was wrong. But, as they say, when everything seems perfect, you should be wary. We didn't have a luxurious house, but we had a cozy cottage in the suburbs. We didn't spend money left and right, but we could always afford a nice vacation once a year. I worked all my life and ensured a quiet retirement. My pension was good, and I had savings that Annie and I had been saving since we were young. Everything seemed to be going according to plan. I loved my regular schedule, coffee in the morning, then the newspaper, a leisurely walk in the park. Annie was usually busy doing her own thing, yoga, volunteering, meeting with friends. Sometimes we spent time together, sometimes we each did our own thing, and everything was calm. Too calm. I didn't notice any alarm bells. I didn't pay attention to the fact that Annie had become a little colder, that she was staying late more often with her friends, that she started taking better care of herself, new clothes, new hairstyles. I had no idea that there was someone else in her life, and that was my biggest mistake. It's amazing how easily we overlook the obvious. If someone had told me that Annie was cheating on me, I would have just laughed. It can't be possible. We've been together for 40 years. We've gone through financial difficulties, the loss of our parents, and even a midlife crisis. I thought that everything was clear between us, that our love had long ago transformed into something more, into trust, mutual respect, and a life together. But in reality, I was just living in my fantasies. One day she came home very late. when I was already in bed, dozing off, when I heard her tiptoeing into the bedroom. Usually, when she was late, she had a few warm words for me, how my day was, whether I had a good dinner, what my plans were for tomorrow. This time, not a word. She just came in undressed and went to bed. Something in me twitched. In the morning I asked her where she had been. She waved me off. "Oh, Gary, come on. I just stayed up late with the girls. The time flew by." But I felt she was lying. This thought haunted me. I tried to brush it off, convinced myself that I was just working myself up out of boredom. But every day this suspicion only grew stronger. A few days later, she left again. She came back late again. But this time I was awake. I heard her texting someone in the bathroom. I got up, went to the door and asked quietly, "Annie, who are you talking to?" Silence. Then the sound of the phone going off and her voicing a "yes," my friend wrote. I didn't say anything, but I felt anger boiling inside me. I had to do something. The next day I decided to check on her. I had never spied on her before, never looked through her phone. But this time I made an exception. I took her phone when she was in the shower. She didn't set a password because she always said that. There should be no secrets between us. But there were secrets. I opened her messages and saw dozens of messages from some Michael R. They were gentle, flirting, discussing meetings. I felt a wave of pain wash over me. It was an insidious blow. I sat in my chair clutching my phone. The world suddenly lost its colors. 40 years of marriage, and this? I heard her come out of the bathroom and quickly put the phone down. She came into the room, smiling, fresh, beautiful. What are you doing?" she asked. I looked at her and suddenly realized that I sat in my chair, looking at Annie, and realized that she was a stranger. Everything I knew about her, everything we had built over the years, now seemed like an illusion. Her smile was no longer warming. Her voice seemed fake. "Gary." She tilted her head, looking at me carefully. I forced myself to answer nothing, just thinking. She nodded, came over and touched my shoulder. This touch made me twitch. I used to love it when she touched me, but now I felt only cold and disgust. I couldn't pretend anymore. But what to do next? My whole life revolved around her. We built this house together, saved every penny together to ensure a peaceful old age. We have always been a team. And now I felt like I was falling into the abyss with nothing to grab onto. I couldn't just ask Herg, "Are you cheating on me?" Because then what? She could have lied. She could have admitted it. But I wasn't ready for either. So I decided to follow her. The next day I told her I was going to visit my friend Bill in the next town. "Oh, that's great, honey," she smiled. "Have fun." She didn't even ask when I would be back. That was the final nail in the coffin of my trust. I parked around the corner and waited. Half an hour later, she came out of the house, got into her car and drove away. I followed. She stopped at an expensive restaurant, and as she got out of the car, and a few seconds later a tall man in an expensive suit approached her. He put his arm around her waist, and they went inside together. My heart exploded with pain. I looked at them through the window. She was laughing, stroking his hand. She looked happy. And I was sitting in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard that my knuckles turned white. When they got out, I took a few photos with my phone. I didn't know why. Maybe I just wanted to prove to myself that it wasn't a dream. At night, I couldn't sleep. Only her words were playing in my head. I just stayed up late with the girls. I got up, went to the kitchen, poured myself a whiskey, and then I was overwhelmed with anger. I had devoted my whole life to her. I worked so that we could have this house, so that we could afford to travel, so that she wouldn't know what a lack of money was. And she just threw me away like an old thing. I wanted to wake her up, throw away all her things, kick her out of my life immediately. But then I remembered that she also has access to our accounts, that we have joint property, that if I did something impulsive, I could lose everything. So I decided to play her game. The next day, I acted as if nothing had happened. I smiled, asked her how her day was. And at the same time, I was preparing to strike. I thought I had already hit rock bottom. But no, the bottom was still ahead. For the next weeks, I lived as if in a fog. I smiled, talked to Annie, even hugged her before going to bed. But inside, everything was burning. I didn't recognize myself anymore. I spent hours flipping through the photos of us together, remembering when things started to go wrong. Had it always been like this? Or did I just not want to notice? But it didn't matter, 'cause I watched her get ready for yoga, knowing that she was actually going to see him. I even knew his name, Mark. He worked for a large corporation, earned decent money, and drove an expensive car. And most importantly, he was 10 years younger than me. That was the most painful thing. She exchanged me for someone younger, more successful. I went to a bar. For the first time in many years, I sat down in a dark corner and ordered a whiskey. Then another one, and another. A bad day, the bartender asked. I laughed. A worse than you can imagine. He silently poured another drink. I don't know how long I sat there, but when I got home, Annie was waiting for me on the couch. Gary, where have you been? Her voice was trembling. For the first time in a long time, I saw fear in her eyes. I was drinking, I said bluntly. She sighed. That I was scared. You didn't answer the phone. Oh, now you're worried about me. I laughed. Her face changed. What's going on with you? You really want to know? I took a step forward. Then tell me, how was it with Mark? She was petrified. And then I realized that she knew that I knew. She wanted to say something, but was silent. I laughed again. Go ahead, tell me I've got it all wrong. Gary. Just say it! She turned away. And I wanted to smash everything around me. To scream, to smash this house, this life that was no longer mine. But I couldn't. I just took my keys and walked out. I was sitting in a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city. An AA gray carpet, an old nightstand, a TV that showed only half the channels. 2 days ago I left home and never returned. And most importantly, I was not going to return. All this time I just lay on the bed looking at the ceiling and thinking, why the hell did I let this happen? How did I not notice her lies? The phone rang nonstop. First Annie, then my friends. I turned off the sound. On the third day I received a text messaging. Gary, this is important. Please pick up the phone. I ignored it. 5 minutes later, the call came again. The number was unknown. I decided to answer it. Maybe it was work or someone other than work. Hello, someone on the other end sighed heavily. Gary, it's Jane. We hadn't talked in almost a year. She was 5 years younger, lived in another state, worked at a law firm. She always had her own life, separate from mine. What happened? I asked immediately. Gary. Dad's in the hospital. He had a heart attack. I sat up. What? He felt sick this morning. We're at the hospital now. The doctors say he's stable, but Gary, come here. Please. I didn't say anything. Gary? Yes, of course I'll come. When the conversation ended, I sat there for a long time, not moving. I was so preoccupied with my pain that I forgot about the people who really mattered. I quickly packed my things, called a taxi, and went to the hospital. When I entered the ward, my father looked smaller. He used to seem like a giant, strong, stern, unbreakable. And now he was lying under an intravenous drip pail with darkened eyes. He opened his eyes and smiled. He was always joking, even in the worst moments. Here I am. It's about time. He sighed. I heard you were having problems there. I looked at Jane in surprise. She just shrugged. My father was always the first to know. Yeah, something like that, I mumbled. A woman, or betrayal. He nodded. I know what it's like. I raised my eyebrows. What? He gave me a long look. Your mother cheated on me. He took me a few seconds to process his words. He never talked about it. You're serious? Yeah, it was a long time ago. Before you were born. And you forgave her? Yeah. But don't forget, it almost destroyed me. He paused and then adding, Son, the question is not whether you can forgive. The question is whether you will be able to live after this. I left the hospital and my head was buzzing. My father went through the same thing, and he still stayed with my mom. But was he able to forget? I took out my phone. One missed call from Annie. I sighed and dialed her number. The phone felt heavy in my hand. I could have just erased her number, and I could have thrown the damn phone away and moved on. But instead, I did the opposite. I called. The rings seemed endless. I was about to hang up when she answered. Gary. Her voice was quiet, like she was unsure, and I felt something tighten inside me. I hadn't heard from her in almost a week. I should have hated her. But instead, I wanted to hear an explanation. You called me, I said. Yeah. Gary, I need to talk to you. I smiled through gritted teeth. A talk. Annie, we talked, I said. Were you cheating on me? And you said, no. And then I found your messages, we talked. She was silent for a few seconds, please. Just meet me. Though I should have said no. But I didn't where. At home. If you can. Took a breath. I was drawn to her like a magnet. It was a temptation to come back, to hear her excuses, maybe even to believe her. But there was also a dilemma. Could I really forget? I stopped at the house and just sat in the car for a few minutes. The lights were on. The kitchen window was ajar. There she might be making tea, as she always did when she was worried. I sighed and got out. Annie opened the door quickly, as if she had been waiting right there. She looked tired. Her hair was in a messy bun, dark circles under her eyes. And yet she was beautiful. Thank you for coming, she whispered. I didn't say anything and just walked into the living room. Everything was just as I had left it. My sweater was still hanging on the back of the chair. My sneakers were by the door. It was as if I had never been there. You said you wanted to talk, I reminded her. Annie sat down nervously across from me. I made a terrible mistake, Gary. I don't know what came over me. I smiled without joy. It was just a one-time thing, right? No. She looked down. Not just once. I thought the room was stuffy. She wasn't even lying. Why, my voice was trembling, though I tried to keep it steady. She looked up. I don't know. I thought you didn't love me anymore. I'm an idiot. I've ruined our life. But I've realized I don't need anyone else, only you. It's too late, I said quietly. Annie's eyes filled with tears. No, we can try again. We can. She stood up and took a step toward me. I should have stepped back. I should have said no, but I stayed where I was. Annie touched my face gently. Gary, I love you. And then I made a choice. Annie stood in front of me, her fingers lightly touching my face. Her eyes were desperate and hopeful at the same time. I could have taken a step back. I could have said it was over. But I stayed where I was. Her touch was familiar, warm. My brain screamed, don't trust her. Don't make the same mistakes. But my heart was still beating in unison with her touch. Gary, she whispered, swallowing back tears. I'll never hurt you again. She moved even closer. Her lips were a few centimeters from mine, and then something inside me clicked. I pulled back. Annie froze. What? I ran my hand over my face as if to wash away all her words. I can't, I said quietly. But you love me, don't you? I looked at her. Once upon a time, I would not have hesitated to answer. But now, I did. I admitted. I was ready to give you everything. Annie staggered back as if I hit her with the words. Gary. But I'm not the man I was then. I continued. She shook her head. We can fix this. No, Annie, we can't. I saw her eyes fill with panic. You're just going to walk away. I sighed. Yes. She stepped forward and grabbed my hand. I'll do Gary, please. I'll do anything. I felt something tighten inside me. This was supposed to be my triumph. She had destroyed me, and now she was begging me to stay. I could have enjoyed this moment, but I was not in the mood. I just gently released my hand. Goodbye, Annie. Her lips trembled. You don't love me anymore. I held my gaze on her face, and I realized no. I remembered how I used to love her unconditionally, but love does not survive betrayal. It does not break into pieces that can be glued together. It disappears. No, I said. That was the last thing she heard from me. And I walked out of the house, and for the first time in a long time, I felt myself breathing easier. This decision was the hardest of my life, but at the same time, the easiest. I was no longer a man who was ready to forgive everything. I was no longer a man who'd be deceived. I got into my car and looked in the mirror. Annie was standing on the doorstep, her hands clasped to her chest. I was no longer sorry. I started the engine and drove away. I thought it was over. I knew that I had put an end to it, closed the door of the past, and would never return to this story again. But life is a tricky thing. It always leaves something unsaid. A few weeks passed after my last conversation with Annie. Though I haven't seen her, haven't heard from her. Even my friends stopped mentioning her name in my presence. I was reclaiming a life that was mine alone. And now, when I finally felt that I was starting to breathe freely, she made herself known again. The number was unknown, but something told me I knew who it was. I pressed answer. Gary. The voice on the phone was excited. Annie, I exhaled. What do you want? A few seconds of silence. We need to talk. It's nothing. It's important. Very important. I should have hung up. I should have. You have 2 minutes, I said. Gary. I'm pregnant. The room was quiet. I sat there staring at the wall, her words repeating in my head. I'm pregnant. These words could have changed everything, but I felt neither joy nor fear. Only anger. I dialed her number. Are you sure? Yes. Her voice was soft, almost pleading. I did the test. What do you want me to do? Gary, this is your child. I laughed. Are you kidding me? No. Her voice trembled. Why should I believe you? More silence. Gary? You've lied to me so many times, I interrupted. Do you think I'll buy it again? But it's true. I closed my eyes. If she had said that a year ago, I would have been the happiest man alive. But now, DNA test. What? It's just a test, Annie. She didn't say anything. If it's really my baby, I'll take care of it. But if this is just another one of your games. I didn't finish, she sobbed. Okay, I passed out. 2 weeks went by. Annie was avoiding me. She didn't call. She didn't write. It seemed strange. I decided to take action. I found her address. I went to her house. And I saw something that put an end to this story. She was standing on the doorstep hugging another man. He was tall, strong, stylish. And he was stroking her stomach. I came closer. Annie looked up and saw me. Panic was in her eyes. Gary. The man turned around. Is that him? He asked. No. She immediately backed away. It's just an ex. He looked at me carefully. An ex who had to believe your lies. I crossed my arms. The man tensed. Lies, I glanced at Annie. He doesn't know the truth either, does he? She didn't say anything. I shook my head. The final blow. I wish you happiness, I said. I turned and walked away. Annie didn't try to stop me anymore. A few months passed. I didn't think about Annie anymore. I didn't try to find out what was wrong with her. Was she really pregnant? Or had she lied again? It didn't matter. I closed that chapter. At least that's what I told myself. But life doesn't like simple endings. One day, when I was returning from work, a message appeared on my phone. The number was unfamiliar. Gary, we need to talk. I was about to delete it, but the next message made me freeze. It's about the baby. I sat in the cafe looking at the woman who had just come in. It was not Annie. With a young, serious, with a folder of documents in her hands, she sat down across from me and introduced herself. My name is Lauren. I'm a lawyer. I waited in silence. Do you have a minute? Go ahead. She put the paperwork in front of me. Did you know Annie had given birth? It took me a few seconds to understand what she was saying. What? She had a baby girl. I leaned back. What do you want from me? Lauren paused. Annie was gone. I leaned forward. What? She left the baby and drove away. I stood by the hospital bed. The little creature was sleeping, curled up in a blanket. Was it her? My daughter. I didn't know. Lauren was silent next to me. What do I do now? I finally asked. That's up to you, she answered. You can take the test. You can refuse. I didn't answer. I just looked at the child. She stretched in her sleep, and I felt something strange. Something I didn't expect. The next day I got the results. The test confirmed it. It was my daughter. And now I was faced with a choice. I could leave her, or I could change my life forever. I picked up the phone and dialed Lauren's number. "I'm taking her in." She paused. "Are you sure about this?" I looked out the window. The world outside seemed different. "Yes. I hope you find this story interesting." Your feedback, suggestions, and subscriptions are always welcome.